Okay, this has been an ongoing project I've been involved with since about 2013, but was really made aware of the importance of these ceremonial structures on the island of Malakula by local communities many years ago. My focus was on much earlier periods, but they all encouraged me to try to kick off a project recording these things, and because they were concerned about damage through development and the lack of connection often with current communities. So these structures are, here's Vanuatu, obviously, in the centre of it all. People arrived there 3,000 years ago, almost certainly, similar languages, and changed over that 3,000-year period to become remarkably linguistically and culturally diverse. So Chris was just talking about central Vanuatu, highly stratified, chiefly systems. I'm talking about Malakula, which is just a little bit further north, which doesn't have those chiefly systems. In fact, talking about chiefs is really probably a colonial introduction. But certainly they constructed these quite spectacular, in many cases, ceremonial structures. Okay, now these are the sorts of materials. Stone is a very broad term. In fact, we often associate stone with volcanics or basaltic material, but in fact, much of the material used on Malakula, it's a big island, it's about 2,000 square kilometres, and it has a whole series of offshore islands. Much of the stone used on the big island is uplifted reef. It's old, tens of thousands of years old. It's continually uplifting. You can see on the top left there, that's cemented beach rock that's used on the smaller islands. And also you can see Acropora coral is actually removed from the reef live and then included within many of the structures. And you can see a young man, a colleague of mine, Arawa Philip, standing next to these sort of tables built out of these coral slabs where human remains are placed. Okay, so you get huge variation across the island of Malakula. There are a whole series of themes that connect, and why I call the thing in stone, wood and bamboo, of course, is we've got the stone which still remains, but of course these things were much more elaborate with all sorts of carvings and other structures and platforms and things associated. The wonderful thing about this part of the world, as opposed to perhaps Europe and some of the much earlier sites that Tim's going to talk about, is that we do have oral traditions associated with these, and we do in some parts of Malakula, particularly those areas that are Catholic, that these ceremonies still take place, and these sites are still very much alive. New stones are being planted, and so we have this wonderful oral traditions and sort of living culture that we can use to sort of make some sense of these much earlier structures across the landscape. They are used for a whole series of ceremonies, but primarily they are associated with ceremonies known as the Namangi, which is a grade-taking ceremony. Okay, individuals host these ceremonies, mostly to do with distribution of largesse, hundreds of pigs, potentially yams and things that are given to people that come and support the ceremony. They come and support the ceremony, bringing themselves pigs and yams, etc. So it's a sort of repeated cycle of debt and exchange that occurs over an individual's life. This is a very large one on the small island of Urupiv. Last Namangi there, unfortunately, was 1914. The Presbyterians certainly worked on getting rid of ceremonies in that region. So we have these stone tables, dolmens, standing stones, here in an area that was subject to punitive expeditions in the 19th century. and people driven out of the area. But people still very much connect to these sites. They connect them to the landscape and their own heritage and connections with other communities. So just also one of the things I want to mention, these sites can range from relatively small, covering, I suppose, a couple of 100 square meters, to others that are covering hectares. And so it indicates once a very large population, but these sites are not restricted, or the activities, the ceremonies associated with them are not restricted to just that tribal group or the associated tribal group. People come from all over the island in supporting individuals' ceremony. And then, of course, that individual potentially reciprocates and returns to other individuals, across linguistic boundaries. They will also support these ceremonies that other individuals will be hosting. Okay, so as I say, there's some variation. They are worked. These are sandstone ones, the lower ones. You can see they're quite tubular. They're not natural. There's a circular arrangement of these things, but again, you can see the table coral being used for placing mostly skulls and other long bones after burial. So and again, many of these sites are quite well preserved, and that missionization, depopulation impacted hugely the activities and things, but people still, these sites are still very, very much sacred. And again, emphasizing the sort of monumental nature of these things and how they were, ultimately much more impressive when they were in full swing. This is a site in Lamap in the southeast. We surveyed, and you can see that the stone in the centre has a whole series of cupules across it. And I was fortunate enough to find this photograph, 1886, taken by Felix Gaillard, who was a medical doctor stationed at a French military station there. And that same stone you can see right at the back here. So it's actually a small component of a much larger sort of ceremonial landscape of carved slit drums, the bamboo platform at the rear. And you can see, in fact, that the size of these things are quite extraordinary compared to the individuals standing next to them. This is a site on the northwest of Malakula, again emphasizing, I think, the sort of size of some of these things. This site covers is a sort of linear sort of feature whole series of platforms and standing stones that covers a distance of 250 meters. It's a really massive site. All this material comes from the coast. It's about 3 kilometers to the coast. And now there's only one extended family that connect to the site. Again, I say emphasizing the depopulation in the region, but it's fiercely defended as part of their cultural heritage. This is another one very nearby. Again, a large site covering several hectares. This is just one of a series of standing stones. Pigs were often tethered near the stones or to the stones as an offering, and then either physically killed or ceremonially killed, and then spread amongst the people who had come to participate and support the hosts. Okay, as I say, some of these stones are clearly shaped. You've got a sort of sandstone one to the right, but then again, you've got that sort of coral, the ancient uplifted coral being worked. These are often found in dry creek beds way up in the interior. Some of them are actually dragged for kilometres, and some of the highest points, I think 300 metres above sea level, I've found very, very large cylindrical stones that have been dragged up there. They've essentially fallen down, a lot of earthquakes in Vanuatu, so unless they're buried quite deeply, there's heavy rain and earthquakes will in fact, shift them, and they'll be now lying horizontal. Here's a very large table, shrine on the small, see the sort of size of these stones. Now, what has always intrigued me, the stone architecture of Melanesia was well known in the 19th and early 20th century, in fact celebrated by people like John Layard, stone men of Malakula vow, and of course Risen Fields, massive tome, the megalithic cultures of Melanesia. But archaeologically, and beyond those initial recordings, these sites have not really been a focus at all in terms of certainly archaeological study. And so we're trying to change that over the last 4 or 5 years with the colleagues at the Vanuatu Cultural Centre. Here you can see a whole range of also carved stones that are associated with some of these sites. I suggest some of them almost certainly associated with the arrival of metal tools. The one in the lower centre there, that's a carver drinking bowl that carved out of a soft stone. Again, some of these features across the entire island, across, I think Malakula, last count, has 30 languages. It's one of the most linguistically diverse places on the planet. Yet you have this consistency of features at these Nasara sites across the island. And as I say, people are not participating within their own region. They may be going to the other side of the big island or to other small islands and participating. Okay, one of the great things, of course, about the fact that they are using this table coral is that we've had great success in dating some of these features. You can see there a big slab on its side. And so, and you get a very, very clear picture of whether it's water, whether it's rolled, it's been tossed up in a cyclone, or whether it's been broken off fresh in the sea. And these things are used on sites that are near the sea, very little effort, but also kilometres, hours of walking into the interior. These large slabs are carried to sites, often in the interior, they're associated with human remains. So, again, very special stones. Okay, so what I think the point that I'm most intrigued and I think needs to be, well, I suppose, discussed tonight or in a sort of wider Pacific debate about ceremonial structures or monumentality is that often there's a whole series of drivers that are assumed that are required. And one of them, of course, is this in Polynesia. It's seen as increased hierarchy, where chiefs with major power over large labour force is essentially the driver behind that. Now, Malakula and much of the north, all of the north, very, very limited. You may be the highest ranking person. You may have gone through all the steps, hosted a whole series of these ceremonies, but you don't increase your power over the group. Okay, so it's very much a sort of, I suppose, a spiritual steps that you're reaching. So again, a whole lot of these series of drivers, dense population, increased surplus of horticultural produce, etc., are seen as the drivers of these things, but which is all there in Malakula, but you don't have these hierarchically chiefly